Yeah, sure. I'm just going to kind of have to go. Hello and welcome to Creating Awesome Readers, our webinar from Sanoma Utbildning. My name is Johnny Niemann and I am one of the authors of Awesome, Sanoma Utbildning's new series for grades 7, 8, 9. I'm a co-author along with Anthony Childs Cutler from Wales and Agnes Gentili Kronholm from Sweden. I'm from the United States, and today we'll be focusing on reading and how our book encourages and supports readers. While the textbook here that I'll be talking about today is the starting point for this webinar, these tips are useful for teachers who don't choose to work with Awesome. And I want to focus primarily on 5 principles to build readers. Those 5 principles that we'll be looking at today are creating interest, thinking globally, being inventive, thinking critically, and engaging meaningfully. And what do I mean by those? And why is this so important? Well, first of all, the statistics show that unfortunately in Sweden, students are reading less than they ever had before. Statens Medieråd in 2015 shows that 9 to 12, 13 to 16-year-olds, and 17 to 18-year-olds are doing things like using the internet and computers much, much more than reading books. And why does that concern us as teachers? Well, the more children read, studies show the more empathetic they are, the happier they are, and the better they do in school and in life. So it's our duty to make sure that we build readers. In our book, we try and do that, and we've put a great focus on encouraging reading. And how do we do that? Well, one of the most important things is, of course, to create interest. And one of my favorite ways of doing that is trying to introduce as many different authors as possible. Maybe you've heard of the author on the left side of your screen. His name is R.L. Stine, and we have both a short story of his and an interview with him to really try and give students a sense of who he is and why he writes. After reading this short story in my class, I had plenty of students who went to the library asking our librarian for a copy of his Goosebumps series, which is an incredibly popular series of books, but wasn't known to them beforehand. So what we try and do, and what a teacher should try and do as often as possible, is to try and introduce authors that students will like and that they'll succeed at in reading. We also try and read varied texts. In our book, we have poetry, interviews, news, stories, facts, dialogues, as many different texts as possible to give all students an opportunity to find something that they'll find interesting. The main point is reading, and it's okay if they read different things. Maybe one thing will attract them more than others, but having varied texts is going to help the students. We also want to prepare readers, and I'm going to show you a little bit about how we do that. We prepare readers before each text by including in our activity book strategies for those students, and also before reading activities where they need to think and reflect about the topic that they're going to have to read about shortly. Not all students may need this, although I do think that the strong students could also be challenged and find it quite interesting. But it's also really valuable for students who need some extra support. They can, in the example of our Malala text, get some help about some vocabulary words. Or in the example of a text that we're going to look at later in our book about being smart at school, they can think about what it means to be smart. Reflecting and thinking before you read a text is a great way to engage students and prepare your readers. And also thinking about strategic tips. It is one of our kunskapskrav to encourage students to think strategically, and unless we take that obligation seriously, our students could be left behind. I also believe it's very important in this day and age to think globally. And in our textbook, we've made a special effort to make sure that we understand that we are in a multicultural society and that we need to represent all students through diverse pieces of literature. And what that means is we try and find representative texts that's in their voices as well. We can't just look at the world as a singular entity, but we need to see it as a plurality of many different people. And our schools reflect that now. And if students don't see themselves in the text, they might not be interested in reading any longer. We make an effort as well to search for texts from new places, places that might not otherwise have been represented in textbooks before. And we've done that in our textbook by specifically looking at 2 different countries, at India. And here you can see we have a really fun text called An A to Z of India. I just have an excerpt of it up here for you right now. But you'll see that all these different facets of India, many of which that I didn't know before, are represented here. The ones that are a little bit shorter, such as monsoon or elephant, give students an opportunity to do their own research and get a little bit deeper into it. In our textbook, instead of just thinking about maybe having a trip around London or visiting Big Ben, we really want to make sure that we broaden our scope and see English as a dynamic language which encompasses so much of our planet and so many countries and continents, not just Europe and the United States. Another thing that we really find important is it's essential for teachers to be inventive and to find texts which could help students think and think across different curriculums. So we've tried to find some texts which can be a launching pad for future projects and which could be used to help reinforce other subjects. For example, technology. In this text you'll see that we have 3 different students who have come up with a new technology, a new invention. They're all from Seattle, Washington, or from Washington State, and they've congregated together in Seattle to show their inventions. This first girl has invented an iPad charger on her bike. Our second student has invented a water filter that can help poor people around the world or people who don't have access to clean water. And finally, our last student has invented an app which helps her organize her day because students are busier than ever. And her mom's even interested in this invention as well. When I used this text in my classroom, my students really loved it, and I used a project afterwards which allowed them to create their own inventions to better the world. And we had a great time with this cross-curricular project, and it was a wonderful launching pad for further exploration. So reading can do that. That's the power of reading. And as you can also see, we've included something called a react and respond with each text. It's not just about comprehension. It's also about thinking about what you're reading, reflecting about what you're reading, and coming up with motivations for what you've read. It's essential for students to do that. And we have a react and respond after every single text, which encourages students to do that. Of course, in our activity book, there are further comprehension activities, but in the textbook itself, every text is followed by a react and respond, which isn't meant to drum away the enjoyment of the text, but rather deepen it. Finally, we also think it's really important for teachers and students to think a little bit more critically. And one way we've done that is by challenging and respecting our readers. You'll see this text on the right-hand side of your page. It's called A Selfie Horror Story. It's certainly an issue that interests students, the internet, and their online lives are so much more vast than we ever could have imagined. And this is a text about a young woman who has had her accounts hacked into. It's in our scary chapter. And this young student one day realizes that her account has been hacked into, and there are pictures of her across all her social media platforms with a dead face and the words "rest in peace" underneath. When my students read this, they were really freaked out. But they were really also interested in seeing a text which was current, which had to do with their lives, which addressed issues that they faced. And that's not something that they see all the time in other textbooks. And it's essential for both us as textbook writers and for teachers to look for texts like this. I also think it's really important for us to respect our students and see them as individuals and understand who they are. With the new grading system that's been imposed in Sweden, there's an awful lot of stress that I've noticed in my classroom. And I'm really happy that we start our book off with a wonderful text which says that there are many ways for students to be smart. You'll see that this text, and this is just a short excerpt of it, talks about students not just being grades or numbers, but also being people and individuals. And if we could relate to students and connect to them in that manner, I think they're more interested in reading and continuing and to listening to what we say, and they'll feel better about themselves. And lastly, what I'd like to show you is something that we really are very proud of in our textbook, and it's called the toolbox. And it's a means for us to engage the students meaningfully. And what do I mean by that? Well, we have all of our vocabulary and context, and I'll show you a little bit about that later. Vocabulary and context is not just giving them isolated words in a Swedish translation, but actually giving them examples of how the words are used. They're much more likely to remember those words if you give them in context. We also really think it's important to have worthwhile activities. And in each text, in each chapter afterwards, we have an end of chapter assignment. In this book, we focused on writing and on speaking. And every single chapter has an end of chapter assignment. But students aren't alone in having to work on that. They actually get examples of how to do that and plenty of support. And I'll show you a little bit about that because students are craving examples and are craving support. They want to know how. They want help. And I'll show you how we do that. First of all, we have our vocabulary and context here. It's not enough to just have million or donkey or dessert all on their own. They need to see it in context as well. It's going to help them a great deal. And think about that. Not all students speak Swedish all that strongly. So if we just give them the Swedish words, they may not understand at all what's going on. This is an example of our end of chapter assignments. And you can see we have two assignments. The first one is Awesome Writer, and that is encouraging students to be a journalist and to write a review of a film that they've seen. And you can see it refers to the toolbox later in our textbook, page 92. Also, we have an assignment called Awesome Speaker, which has a little bit to do with the inventions assignment that we looked at earlier. Let me first show you a little bit more about the Awesome Writer. First of all, here's page 92. It encourages students to actually get a specific definition of what we're looking for. And not only that, we diagram it for them. Here you can see they need to have a headline. They need to have information about the film. They need to have an introduction, opinions and information, including positive and negative things, and a conclusion. An entire film review is broken down for them. I was so happy the other day when one of my students asked if she could borrow the book again to look at this exact diagram and section to support her writing of a review assignment that I gave my students. You'll also be happy to know the toolbox is available in Swedish. So it's not just information in English. It could also help students who need that help by having all of this information in Swedish as well. The toolbox, and this is just a few samples of what we do regarding the speaking assignment, because presentations are essential for students these days. And these are excerpts from 3 whole pages of how we help students with their presentations. First, you'll see we want to encourage them to have a strong structure. We give them examples. We want to give them useful phrases from the introduction all the way to the conclusion. And then we also need to give them some advice for when they're presenting, what their voice and language should be like, and how important it is to make eye contact. And of course, we have a little instruction for them that if the teacher gives them a time limit, make sure they stick to it. Next, I'm really happy to announce as well that all of these texts that we have in Awesome 7 are available on our very popular Övningsmasteren, where students have the opportunity to listen to the texts or to practice their vocabulary through some fun internet-based exercises. Those are available for free. Just click on the övningsmasteren.se and students are able to access that, and teachers are able to build material from that as well. It's really a great way of reinforcing the vocabulary that you've already worked on with your students. The Awesome textbook, number 7, is available now. Number 8 is planned for next year. Number 9 is planned for the year after. And our activity book, including a teacher's guide, the online Facit, and MP3 files will all be available in August of available right and ready for you at the beginning of the new school year. thanks so much for taking the time today to listen to this webinar, and I hope that you've gained something from this that you can bring into your classroom to better your teaching and to support your students. It's been my pleasure, and have a wonderful day.